our welcome everybody back to our third and last presentation for this weekend. Just a reminder, 2 weeks. Camp meeting in California is in approximately 2 weeks. It begins just before the weekend. It starts on the 21st. And I hope to meet everybody there, either online or in person. Safe travels for all those who are going to be with us then. Let's open with a word of prayer. Holy God, I want to thank you for your continued watch care, for your goodness over us. We have many questions that never seem to get answered, at least not with clarity. And as soon as you answer one question for us, it just opens up further thoughts, further questions. Always a journey of discovery. We know that it's your will that it should be that way, even if we can get frustrated, even if we don't understand the plan that you have laid before us. Help each of us to work for our own salvation, and not only that, but to help and assist those that are around us in any capacity or any way that we can. Bless us as we continue to study your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you. So just erasing this was just some discussion that we had during our break, not directly related to our conversation. So in our last presentation together, we discussed how we should be approaching inspiration. And the summary of what I want to say is that I think it's important that when we look at inspiration, we approach it in a way that is correct. In the example that we have before us, my understanding is that Moses speaks about an experience which is negative, this captivity, and at the end of that captivity, God is going to come into reconciliation with their people. And that's why we would call it good days. And it may not say it explicitly, but I'm happy to say that it marks a new covenant in the time of Moses. You could go back into the story and you could see how that new covenant works. We now have a codified law. We now have a new priesthood, and we have the sanctuary system. And each of us each of us has an awareness, to whatever degree, that that sanctuary service that was set up at the end of, I don't want to call it the end of the days, because that would not be using the days in the correct way, but at the end of that captivity, the sanctuary, however we got there, because we know that the sanctuary system was put into place because of apostasy. We understand that, the golden calf. This whole new system of worship, or the covenant, was introduced at that time period, and it was meant to be of benefit to Israel. It was meant to place the law that was in that tent in your heart. That's what it was designed to do, not thousands of years into the future. It was meant to do that right there and then in the present. Does anybody not feel comfortable with that concept, with that model? The sanctuary service was designed to create the new birth experience in the human being in real time, right then and there. Yep. So hopefully everybody is comfortable with that.
Did you render the system overview, or is it too much? The new birth experience through the sanctuary, because we just know all this ritualistic.
Sure. I guess what I wanted to say about that was that these, you used the term ritualistic experiences, these steps that humans have to go through help us to experience, or have the possibility of experiencing, a new birth experience. So if you go back to Genesis, when Adam had to, by their own hand, Adam, that's male and female, when they had to slay that lamb by their own hand, that act changed who they were, from rebels to not slaves, but what they were meant to be before that rebellion had taken place. It brought them to the place where they were designed to be, which were children of God. Just the very act of doing that. And the whole ceremonial system, the sacrificial service, was all designed to do that, both by its theory and its practice. It was meant to change people's heart. It doesn't do a very good job, unfortunately. So then you go to Jeremiah, and Jeremiah says, at the end of the captivity, the Babylonian captivity, we will call it Nebuchadnezzar, at the end of that 70 years, Nebuchadnezzar is long dead by then, when they come out of that captivity, that God is going to renew the covenant with their people, and they're going to have a new birth experience. And it should be real, it should be genuine. The captivity itself, the slavery, the hardship, the toil, should have taught them lessons about it's far better to be good than be bad, basically. It didn't work, as we all know. And then in the third dispensation that's on the board, we're now in the time of Paul. And we spoke during the break about how successful that was. And if you read the fine print, you realize that it wasn't very successful then either. Just even within the church, there's a lot of infighting. We spoke about most of the leadership didn't trust, didn't like, and more than a few were jealous of Paul and the work that he, if I could call it, his team, because he didn't work alone, did with him. It seems to me they always were trying to kind of put him into some corner and confine or box him in, because they didn't like who he was and what he taught and how he behaved. There's a lot of disagreement between the members that you can see in the book of Acts. So all of this is happening after the captivity, when there's this new covenant experience that Paul speaks about eloquently, even going way beyond quoting Jeremiah. It just doesn't seem to work. And then we come to our own dispensation, and we're all crossing our fingers, hoping it's all going to be good for our time. And I just want to comment on that, about what we're expecting, because I was asked during the break, well, is there a clock that's running where all of this stuff comes to its end? So if I were to say to you, talking about our dispensation here, we have to bring it down to here. We're in study number 3. So is there a timer when, and the question is, when it wraps up, when things wrap up, is there a timer that God's got? What do people think? Go ahead. No,
You're kind of going back to the first advent and how like Ellen White described it as kind of like the time to go, like God changed back then. The first advent.
So in some previous studies, going back to the dispensation of Christ, or Paul in this case, that there's an Ellen White quote that says something along the line, when the clock strikes a certain time or an hour, things happen. Yeah. So that would indicate yes. Sorry, Alyssa.
I get the image that I was seeing, going to the imagery of the cup of the raft of fornication being filled, and drops of blood just.
So there's a cup that's getting filled, which would indicate some kind of timer. So is it just when the people are ready, with the inference being it's not based upon some kind of set date? Is that what you mean? I'm not asking you if you agree with it. I'm just asking you, if that's what you meant, whether you agree with it or not. Did you mean that when the people are ready, then things happen, as opposed to set times? Yeah. Okay. So if we were to go, say, to the birth of Christ. So is the birth of Christ going to happen at a predetermined time, a predetermined date, or is it flexible? Because like you're going to go like, if Jesus was born on a particular date, say year 1, could it be plus or minus 5 or plus or minus 100? So do you think it can depend on circumstances? Pax Romana. What's Pax Romana? So it's Pax Romana, so it's like a time of peace and safety, if I could say, yeah? Or stability, not peace, a time of stability. Yeah?
So.
Someone saying something online? No? Okay. So the time of the end, is that a fixed date, or does it depend on Pax Romana? Or the equivalent of Pax Romana or something? So it could have been like 1898 if the world wasn't ready, or 1698. Doesn't have to be 1798.
like, it was like the end of the 1260s, so like, is that what marks the seventh gen? Not like.
So I don't know if that's a rhetorical question, but the end of the 1260 marks the time of the end. I think you know that. So is that a fixed date, like a timer, or is it flexible? So if it ended in 1799, it would be 1261 prophecy, wouldn't it? But it had a fixed date, didn't it, at the beginning? Because it's not 539 or 536, it's 538. Isn't that a fixed point in time? Something happens and you have a fixed starting point. My question was based upon your question over the break. And so the first part of the question, it's a multi-step question. Is there such a thing as timers? And timers are exactly what they say. Sorry? Because the time of the end is marking a fixed period, 1260 exactly, not plus or minus. And once you establish this date, the start, the end is fixed. Without getting into the intricacies of how you start the clock at that start, once you start the clock, then once it reaches 1260, the buzzer goes and that's it. It can't change. Why can't we predict the end? You mean like in the future? Because we're not very good at time calculations. Or we've already got to whatever time calculation that we've got to, and say like, I don't know, 14, 19, 21, 24, if you want to put some kind of time element to them, if you were to do that, then I guess what we'd be looking for is some clever person to stand up and say, I've got the next one, whatever that would be. And they'd have to show you what it's based upon. But I think you've been around for long enough that you know we've just run out of material, or we're not agreeing on the terms and conditions of how to calculate time anymore. So either it's become more complicated and we haven't caught up yet, or we've done enough of that and now we're not going to do any more. 1,260 years, there's not much time prophecy going on, but there's a whole heap of events going on. In our history, from 1989 to now, how many years is that? 36? 36 years is just like a blink. And we're expecting to, I'm not saying you're expecting it, but your question is inferring that we should know the time of so many intricate details, like 2001, 2012, 2014, 18, 19, 21, 24, if you want to do that. So that's 7, and they're really close apart. It becomes difficult to do that, and I'm not even sure how necessary, because we're already here. I mean, the time of the end, 1989 to where we are now, it's a really short time period. If you go back to 1798 and clock 36 years into the future, the Millerite movement isn't even doing anything yet. 36 years later, after 1798, it's only sort of getting off the ground. I think if you want to mark 1840, is that 42 years? Yeah. It's not even begun to do anything until 42 years after time of the end. And we want to our line is exploding with dates and information and things, and we're only at number 36 now. So I don't know the answer to your question in any meaningful way, but I think we've done pretty well on time, I would argue. So do we agree on timers factor into all of this? So I'm going to put a tick to that. I'll erase this. So then we'll look at, I'm just going to call it nations. We might have different terms. We could call it the world or nations, and we'll put the rise and the fall of nations. So those things seem to happen, and often they're not exact to a specific time. They kind of, stuff happens. Someone's born, and an event happens in nature, and they begin to trigger how nations behave or how they respond. So are we okay if I just put nations, how they behave? That has an effect. Yeah. So for instance, COVID has shaped and molded our dispensation in a way that's been pretty profound. And if we all agree with that.
But these are things that are shaping our time that previous dispensations had no way of seeing.
I'm not making that point. I'm just trying. The question, I can't remember exactly what the question was. I think the question was like, when does the end happen? What's the criteria of that happening? So I'm going to phrase it that way. And I'm saying part of the answer is there's a timer. Part of it is that nations behave in a certain way, and their behavior is either self-determination, they get a mover and shaker or a thought leader that says this is what we're going to do, or the environment shapes and molds what's going to happen. So I hope we're all comfortable on this second point, that without COVID and the economic disaster that it produced, or that humans produced because of COVID, because it wasn't COVID itself that did it. COVID didn't destroy the world. It was the lockdown that did more damage than COVID itself. Without that happening, it's 50-50 whether or not this current administration would be in power today, I think, because they won, if we put immigration to one side, they won on the economy. That's what it seems to me. And the economy went out of control because of the COVID response, both nationally and internationally. So that's what I want to say about nations. Something happens, however it happened, this virus escaped into the population, and the implications of all of that, the after effects, created pretty much a worldwide economic disaster, and that economic disaster has shaped history to the degree that the current administration is now in power. I'm not saying it's the only reason, but you can see a cause and effect, hopefully, there. So there's that, and then there's, I'll just call it the church. And we can just say how they behave. So hopefully we agree with that. So there may be others, but I'm just going to focus on, there are three things that mark or define how we get to the end when everything's going to be finished. There's some timer, nations behave in a certain way, the church behaves in a certain way. So we might say the nations one. So we would do 6th and 7th kingdom. You're okay with that? So we're going to a Bible passage. It speaks about heads and nations and beasts rising and all of that. And once you put all of that through the ringer and you've squeezed out all the information, you've got some kind of consistent story, you look around and you say, oh, these kingdoms are rising and falling. And they seem to be doing that in concert with the time. And at the very basic, the time that we have is 1989 and 2001 as a minimum, and 2014 if you're willing to see and accept that. So you have those 3 dates that are all timers, and when you overlay those timers with what's happening with nations, and we would say 6th and 7th kingdom, you see that they overlap. So the question is, what happens if the timer ends when the church is behaving badly? So that's kind of what your question was during the break, and that's what I want to at least try to answer in a very brief and simple fashion. And then we'll move on, hopefully to your satisfaction, but maybe not. And then we see the church is doing its thing as well. So this movement was created at the time of the end. And I know some of these are circular arguments, because who creates the time of the end? I was going to say this movement did. Elder Jeff says, I'm going to stand up and say, I'm going to create a new church. We don't like to call ourselves a church. And to justify it, I'll create a new time of the end just for myself, just at the same time that I'm beginning to do my studies. Isn't that pretty much how it goes? He starts saying, I'm going to look at this, and the year was 1989. He says, to make it look good, let's make 1989 a time of the end. So if you ask anybody outside of this movement, they'd all say, this is just crazy what you're doing. It's self-justification, self-circular arguments. So I'm just trying to say, I understand that perspective. I'm not saying I don't agree with it. So at the right time, when the timer came to its end and the bell started ringing, the church begins to do its thing. The stone comes out of the mountain, if we can say it that way.
Just start the end after he went to John Osborne, Daniel Revelation things, and he came into conflict with them.
Yes, I think I remember vaguely a story. I can't remember the name. That he goes to some Daniel Revelation studies and they teaching and he says, that's wrong. And they say, well, what's right? He says, I don't know what's right, but I know that's wrong. And then he says to himself, I guess, I have to try and understand it myself. Yes, I think that's.
Yeah, I think that wanted consistency. Like if it's just natural, I mean, if it's literal, just make all literal. And if it's spiritual, make it all spiritual. Sometimes.
Yes. So he goes to these studies, and you've said it's John Osborne, so I'm assuming that's correct. And he says, the way you're using methodology to understand the books of Daniel Revelation, they're just not consistent. I want to have consistency. And so that's why I say the church, in that context, it's some random thing. He goes to some random meeting at a random time, and it impacts his personal life. He says, I'm going to do some study, and that study happens around the same time as I'm saying the timer starts ringing the bell and says, we've run out of time. And it's at some time later that you realize actually all those things came together at the same time. And obviously this is 1140, the King of the North, King of the South, Papal Church, United States, the Soviet Union, as they all come together, that confluence of events, they're all happening all at the same time. So there are 3 things happening, if we're okay with that. So what happens when all of these things are going on, and the timer that we set here was the time of the end one, and there's some other ones afterwards. We've got 2001, which we know is a time, and 2014, which we know is a time. So if we're okay with those, if And I know they're on the line of the priests. So if you go to the 144,000, what happens when the nations are all doing their thing? You get to the seventh kingdom, stroke the eighth, and it's in its prime, and the timer has now gone, and here we are, and we're not ready. What happens? Does God say, oh dear, let's do this again, we'll have a fifth generation, or slow down time, which is a bit difficult to because the time has already ended? What happens if the timer's done its thing properly and the nations are doing their thing properly and we're not? You had your hand up. End of the world. Is that what you said? Does that mean it's the end of us because we're not ready? Can't have the end of the world unless we're ready, can we? Otherwise we'll be
I have a
doomed.
comment.
There will be no great controversy. Just 1 second online. A new dispensation. Yes, so we'd have number 5. So we'd have to do it all over again. I hope you all got your pensions in order. It gets that bad. Any other comments? Online. Who was that? Sorry?
Who's Elaine?
Elaine, go ahead,
Who's
Elaine.
Elaine? Going back to 1798 in Daniel 11:40, where I don't know if that's where
So,
the reference
1
was, but a
second.
conditional
I don't know if they
prophecy.
can hear you. 1 second. I don't know if the recording can hear you. Can the recording hear you when they speak online? Do I need to repeat online statements?
No, we can hear Elaine. Yeah.
And it picks up the
For the
recording,
recording?
yes.
Okay,
Yes,
you
it
carry
will.
on then. I don't need to repeat online.
Can
everybody hear her?
The thought of conditional prophecy, the discussion that opened up Uriah Smith was right.
I lost the point that you were making. I'm going to write conditional prophecy.
Yes, and the point was brought up in relation to Uriah Smith was right.
Okay? Does everybody understand what she's saying? You have to repeat. They don't understand what you're saying, Elaine.
That if things aren't fulfilled properly, then the prophecy repeats. I don't know if that's the right way to say it.
Okay.
So things go on.
In your opinion, should have things wrapped up in that dispensation?
No. In the Millerite history?
Yes.
No.
So that was not a conditional prophecy then?
I have to think about that.
Okay. Alyssa?
Be 1,000 years. Isn't that where we can finish things off, our learning process?
1,000 years, we're going to finish things off.
Like things come to its end here, but we're not ready. So we've got 1,000 years to finish.
So the timer ends, the 8th kingdom's here, and we're not ready. Did I say that? I think I said we're not ready. What, now? I said that now? Look,
I
that was a
changed to yes.
question. That wasn't me. I'm asking a question on behalf of my questioner. And you turn it into a statement of fact. Okay? If you're not ready, if this is not ready, how are you going to get to heaven?
By God's grace.
It's like by hook or by crook. Like the back. Yeah, the back door route illegally.
Climb the fence? No, it would hurt.
What am I saying?
That if we're not prepared, then we don't get to go.
Yeah.
It just got hot.
And this has just got hot. Oh, Sue Ellen first, then Gloria. That's why we have the great test that we have to pass. We have to pass the great test.
I
Gloria?
have two questions, or one question, but when God's hammer, isn't the king of the north will be used by God to get us ready? Isn't that the whole part that he knows the timing? So
God's got a hammer, the king of the north, and the king of the north is going to hammer us into shape.
yeah, the circumstances, we could, if we go to the wrong path, I think, yeah.
So if the circumstances, if we go to the wrong path, the king of the north is going to shape us, put us back in the right place. Yeah. So just based upon what Gloria said, I'm going to put a question mark on conditional prophecy, just for future notes. So we've got three people. We've got the king of the north, and we've got oh, let me see if I can find his name. Yeah. Then we've got Jehoiakim. And he's a king. And he's the church. What was your question? What point?
What does ready mean? That's what I'm saying.
Oh, no, your question was the king of the north is going to knock us into shape. Yep. Okay. So king of the north, Jehoiakim, and who's the third one? Jeremiah. Okay. So this is for Gloria. King of the north. That was then, now.
What? No, what is now? The Trump is
So I'll just put USA.
army. Oh, the SDA church.
Oh, which one you want to go for?
SDA church.
SDA? Jeremiah?
Yourself. He's the elder Pippin, elder Parminder.
Okay. All of us. So in this story here, Babylon, Jeremiah is going to go through an experience. We know that. But is Jeremiah failing? Is he being knocked around by Babylon and knocked into shape? Or is he already in shape? So he's already in good shape. So he's going to go through some experiences. I will call it a refining process, but he's already in good shape. The church, they're going to get bashed around and they're just going to get their head knocked off. It wasn't meant to do that. It was meant to shape and mold them into something decent, but it doesn't. It ends up crushing them. So if we bring that to our own time, the king of the north now isn't the one that's going to be changing and molding us because we're already fit for purpose. If you just take this parallel, we go through a refining process for sure, but it's not wholesale. It's not a wholesale remake of who and what we are. And it should be for the church, the SDA church, but you already know what their future is based upon this past story. So does that help?
Yes.
There. So the king of the north isn't going to help us. That's the summary at that point. So I want to suggest the following. So we have a movement. Here we are. And the movement is comprised of two things. I was going to ask you what they are, but you won't know because it could be anything. I'm going to give you one of them, you. Movement comprises of you. Okay? So if you're good, what's the movement? Good. Yep. So we can compare and contrast the movement and you and the movement. So if you're failing, movement's failing. So if you'll fail, then this is the movement of failure. Agree with that? Someone said no? Then what have I said that's wrong? If you are in the movement, and if you fail, the movement's going to fail. I'm not looking at the second branch yet. We'll do the second branch in a moment. If your comment was there's more than you, the you is just you. Yeah? There's lots of yous, plural. So the question that was asked is how many yous, us, how many yous does it take to make this a movement of success? That was, I think, the question. If there's not enough of us, does that mean we're not a movement of success and we're going to go to a fifth generation? That's where that logic will take you. Does everybody understand that logical step that I've just said? If there's not enough of you who are good, successful, the movement, because the movement is just 50 of us getting together in this room. There's 15 of us, 20 of us. When we all get together here, if 16 out of 20 of us were all failing, this room is a room of failure, isn't it? I mean, how do we mark success? It's failed. So we're not a movement of success. This meeting has failed. If enough of us were failing. So the question is, how many of us does it take to be good before we say we're a movement of success? So in this room, if there was one good person, can all of us get in? Does the movement say, okay, the movement's all going to get through, it's all going to be good? That's probably, is that me? No. Nope, not me. Okay, so that's that one. What else makes this movement up? So there's you, us, collectively. So there's the message and the methodology. So can I call it the rules? So the rules. So today, we're not quite at the end yet, I don't think. Where are we with the rules? With the methodology? You said methodology and then message. Okay, so let me put that then. Methodology and message. And I'm going to just call them rules. Where are we today on those? Failure or success? We're there? Oh, we failed on our methodology and our message? You think today?
The rules, and you're breaking it down.
Carry on. I just want to understand what you're saying. I'm not trying to challenge it quite yet. So it's fine. We can explore that together because other people.
My eyes have been closed.
So I said, did I say? I think you said rules, or I used. That might be my word, and that's method and the message. So my question is, have we been successful with our methodology and our message, or has it just failed? And what were you saying?
I'd say that some people have been very successful and others
Okay, so now you're speaking about individual people, how they apply rules and how they manage them. Yep. So any other options? I've got us individuals, and I've got the rules or the method or the message.
Force the perspective to be corporate,
Say that again.
not the individuals, how they apply methodology.
So if we apply this bottom leg in a corporate fashion, not individual members,
We would say success, because if we don't even have a correct methodology, we wouldn't have a movement.
so George says, I don't think it is circular. So George says, if we look at this at a corporate level, then he didn't quite say it this way, but tell me if I'm saying it wrong. We wouldn't have got this far unless our message had integrity to it. Yeah?
Information that he found was true.
Yes. So there are individuals that may not be able to replicate, they may make mistakes, but everyone here, whether you can prove it or not, says 1989, tick. 1989 is methodology and method or rules. 2001, or you go to 91, 96, 2001, 2009, 12, all of those dates are all based upon a fixed method, and each of those dates, which are all events or waymarks, have brought us to this point. And if there was some mistake, if we had missed 2001 and got some different thing, we couldn't have arrived here. So we must have had a message that had integrity to bring us to this point in our experience, I would suggest. So I find myself agreeing with the argument that George has just used. Kathy? Yeah? Okay, good. So we're in agreement. The fact that individual members may not know how to use Miller's rules correctly, or they make a mistake, or they can't remember things, isn't what this lower leg is about. It's not even so much that God has raised up individual people like Elder Tess or Elder Jeff. It's the fact that this movement has a belief system that's corporately accepted. I don't know anybody in the movement who says it wasn't 1989. That was wrong. To be in this movement, to be part of this, it's a given. 2001, 2018, Acts 27, things like that. Chawatu and Kimberley, if you're familiar with those with their names, Raphia and Panium, and how they went into Daniel 11 to draw out that truth. And once that was done, how it was built upon when all the tests came and revisited that. Same with 2014. The same with the Second World War, how the movement was fully conscious that the Second World War was a prophetic waymark since 1798, in the time of the end. But most people didn't know what to do with it until Elder Tess came and she just hammered it all out. I can use worked it all out. Don't use hammer. So that's one way to describe that. So of late, I have used the word institution in a different way to how Elder Tess used it. They're both legally correct according to definitions. And the way I've used institution, I don't know if anybody's going to venture, or shall I do it? It's the same thing. I'm saying institution are the rules or the laws that govern how this movement behaves and operates. So we just spoke about rules here, which was methodology and the message. And I've probably done this. I'll probably redo the graphic. I'm going to do it this way. So these are both rules. So when I do it next time, it's going to be like a branch like that. Rule 1, rule 2. This would be 2 and this would be 1. That's how it will look in the future when I redo this. So rules 2, we've got method. What's this rules 2 institution? What am I referring to here? Got a message. I'm going to call it, you might call it something different. I'm going to call it organization. Hopefully, if I use that term, it will resonate with you and you'll know that Miller didn't want to, he had a message, didn't he? Following rules, but he didn't want to organize because he wanted to remain denominated, you know, part of the old thing. And Elder Jeff had a very similar position. I remember even up to 2009 speaking about this issue of organization, where he was of the conviction that we're still at Seventh-day Adventists. And it took us to 2016, not doctrinally or rules 1, but based upon rules 2. It took us to 2016 before we actually got serious about organization in the way we would understand it today. So it's a pretty recent phenomena in the history of the movement. And this also is institutions. So everybody has their own view. If you don't agree, please, you can, I was going to say please don't voice it, but please feel free to voice it. There's a question mark here. Some of us are passing and some of us are failing. The rules, methodology, I'm going to put a big tick on that one. I think the way George explained it, hopefully we also, I think most of us who voiced said we in agreement that the institution with respect to methodology and the message are correct, because we couldn't have got to 2025 if we'd made some big blunder. We didn't understand Raphia or Panium or the cross or the midnight cry message. We couldn't have arrived here. We wouldn't understand what the great test is. So I'm going to say that. When it comes to the organization, I'll put 2016 in here as a mark of, not the, depending on how you would do it, I'm going to just use that in this context to say that's the beginning of it. Success or failure, organizationally. I don't know what your individual marker would be. Too much bureaucracy, too much, it's the pyramid is, or the tree is too sharp, it's too narrow, it's too broad, too many men, not enough women, too many women, not enough men. Where do you see we are organizationally? If you have a problem, is it dealt with, I don't want to call it, I was going to say efficiently, but legally, is it dealt with following rules? Do you feel that if you come up with some problems or the way the leadership are taking this movement, it's done in a way that is illegal with respect to all the rules of organization that this movement should be putting into practice? Alyssa?
So it's run by a radical feminist, someone who believes and practices and follows it.
So I put a small tick.
I think anything that a member brings up to be addressed is handled legally.
So This one here can be problematic because individual people's experience, they'll say, I wasn't treated fairly by the system, or the system did me an injustice. The system being, the organization of this movement. So I acknowledge that occasionally people feel that they've not been taken care of properly, that their case hasn't been considered well, that a disservice has been done to them. So I'm not denying that, and I'm not saying that all of our leaders are perfect, because that's a bit about the first leg, the you, the us. But if you look at, I'm not saying we have, I can't, not literally, don't look at some charter that we have, because we don't have one. We don't have some codified law book. But if there's a problem, are things done in a fair, equitable, and in a reasonable way? Does everybody get due process? The 14th Amendment, if I can borrow that term. Or do people say, I'm from country X, and because I'm from there and I don't have any money, I don't get treated properly, or my gender or my age, or my skin color or something. Does the movement treat people equally? I guess that to me would be one of the major markers, if not the primary marker, to know that we're doing this properly or not. So I don't know what people's, if we're happy to put a big tick on, or we're not. And for those people who feel that their case, or a case that they know hasn't been treated properly, if they can look beyond their individual case because it wasn't dealt with properly by a specific individual, they can see that the rules and systems that are put into place are actually fit for purpose. Over to you. I put a big X or I put a big tick? Go ahead. Yes, so the problem with, I'm trying to factor out personality clashes because you, a member, and me, a leader, we have a personality clash, and you say, I've got this issue and I need it sorted out. I need you to sort it out. And because of our personalities, we clash. So there's not much that can be done to fix that easily unless we begin to, understand each other. But the rules and the processes that are put into place, I guess that's what I'm asking for, is despite our personality differences, can you get redress? Can you get your issue, your case dealt with in an equitable fashion, even if you and I don't see eye to eye? That's my question.
I think so.
My comment on that is how, I don't know how things are handled outside of my little sphere in this movement. So I don't know that we can answer that. I mean,
So,
Australia.
just 1 second then. Kathy said outside of her sphere of influence, IPR, she doesn't know how things are handled or managed. So if I were to ask you, in your situation, are things handled in a way that you feel are fair and equitable
I don't.
for you? So if I were to say in other regions of the world, if they were handled in the same way that they're handled here, I guess you'd say then things are all good then. Okay. And who said, someone online said yes? Who was that?
Hi, Elder Parminder, this is Lana. Yes, that was me.
Ah. Good.
I'm sorry. Is there time for that question? Beyonce. I've experienced it personally, but I've seen it happen to others. And I can say it could be gender and racism, but I don't know if there's even more than that. And I don't think it was handled appropriately. That's my comment.
So in your particular situation, when you needed some, who's speaking, by the way? Or you don't have to
Oh,
say
that's
your name
Eva.
if you don't.
I'm so sorry, Eva.
Okay, I thought it was Eva. If it wasn't handled correctly in your case, do you feel that you have an avenue to get redress? That we have systems in place where if you're not satisfied with the way that your case has been handled, it can be looked at by an independent party, by someone else to review the decision that was made, etc., etc.
Maybe. I think I'm more concerned not for myself, but for the other person. And because I don't see an interest in the other person, like in quote justice for them, I'm just kind of like in a limbo where I'm just like a standby observer.
Okay, so you're speaking on behalf of someone else.
Yes. So
Okay.
that's why it's difficult for me to, pursue that, because I don't know if that other person just not interested now, or yeah, I'm not sure. But just because I see that injustice, even though it's not personally towards me, and I guess I'm just more concerned because of somebody else. But anyhow, that's just my opinion.
Okay. Anyone else? So we've spoken about the rules, and rules 1 and rules 2 is how we handle the work of this movement administratively. If we're doing things according to the rules that this movement professes to believe, if people are treated equally under the law, if they feel that they can get their cases heard, if there is dissatisfaction, I call it at the lower court, that they can go to a higher court. I don't know if people want to have an opinion, because if I'm going to give the answer, everyone's going to say I'm biased, which I am, but of course. So I'm going to say yes. I think we're doing really well, to be honest. I'll give myself a really big tick.
Hello?
Who's speaking?
Olivine.
Olivine.
I believe everybody has an equal opportunity. I believe that persons might not necessarily, all persons depending on their personality may not take the opportunities that are there, but I believe that the opportunities afforded equally to everybody.
Okay, thank you. Coming back to the question. When we talk about a movement of success, what are we referring to? How many of us pass, or some other marker? And what I'm suggesting, if I haven't suggested it before, is that what marks this movement as success, whether it's going to pass or fail, is this one here, not this one here. So the criteria about when the end comes is not based upon how many in this movement, how many individuals, percentage-wise, numbers-wise, are good and how many are bad. I don't believe that's what the marker is. I think what the marker is once this movement has corrected itself institutionally, both in its organization and in its message. I think that's what the marker is about. When God looks at the church, looks at this movement, says, has it passed or has it failed? Can we wrap things up or not? I don't think it's based upon the individual numbers or the individual people. I think the criteria is the latter, not the former.
Elder Parminder.
Who's speaking?
Oh, this is Lana. Sorry to interrupt
Lana.
you. I was just thinking, could we bring as an example Noah, example of Noah, that he, out of that multitude of people, was found to be worthy to pass to the next dispensation, so to speak. Meaning that if there is one person that can be counted as a movement, and if that one person is successful including in the rules and organization, then it is a success.
Can everybody hear Lana? So she went back to the story of Noah and said, almost paraphrasing the verse, there's one human being that I have found righteous, and because there's one, everything can come to the end. Is that what you said?
Yeah, like meaning that that one person that responded to God's call.
Yes.
Right. So
It's the only one of us in the movement, when one of us gets our act together, it can be, we can come to an end. Is that the point you're making?
yes.
Okay.
Even so, I'm not sure if it's true.
Okay. So my thoughts are the following, that it's not about how many of us are good and how many of us are bad, even if it's just one of us. I'll explain why I think that. I think it's about institutionally whether or not this movement has come to a point that it's passed as opposed to failed. There's always going to be development. There's always going to be some change, because the institutions that make this movement are run by individuals. And there's individual leaders that make mistakes, that have prejudices. There's individuals that don't understand methodology quite correct, et cetera, et cetera. So we understand that. But I think if we were to use the second criteria, which is institutions or rules, as the marker that the movement has passed or failed, that now the movement can come to an end, then when we went to this one, timer, nations, and church, we already know the timer is there, whichever date you want to specifically pick. We can go to some major ones. 2021. We know 2021 is, everybody should agree on 2021 as the most recent date with respect to a timer, which is Panium. Some people may or may not agree with the timer with respect to the Sunday law. They may not associate that with a specific date. So timer, I think we're good. The nations, I think everybody can see right in a time period where that's already happening if you didn't see it before. The seventh kingdom is already here, alive and kicking, literally. And then the question is the church lagging behind? Because when you look around, you say, we see many dysfunctional people in our movement. Most of the leaders aren't very good, or some of them, or whatever. So you say, oh, the church is failing. So how many of us is it going to take before we all get our act together? Is it, as was suggested a minute ago, at least one of us? If one of us gets our act together, how does that even help? Because otherwise you go down the route that Alyssa says, the other 99%, they're all going to get in by the coattail of the person that was good, because you know that's breaking the rules. It can't work that way. So I want to suggest that the church has passed, is all good, it's all fine, because institutionally, both in our message and methodology and our organization, we have succeeded. You may not like the particular leader that's in a particular role because they didn't treat you too well. I'm not arguing that or even defending it. I believe that the structure that we have is fit for purpose, and is doing its job properly, despite individual people that may not understand things. Just in the same way, institutionally, the methodology and the message that we have is correct and sound, even though you have individual members. Some of them may be obscure individuals that nobody's heard of, and some of them may be leading teachers who are teaching things that are wrong. They're not teaching correctly. That can still happen now, probably still is happening now, but it doesn't mean that that tick shouldn't be there. So if you can navigate your way through that logic, that argument, then God is not waiting for enough of us to be good before God says the end has come, it's time. I don't think it's based upon that model at all. I think it's based upon a very different model, and the model is when this movement institutionally has arrived, has achieved whatever goal God has set in place, irrespective of how good or bad individual members in the movement are. And I don't know if that's a radical thought for people. Go ahead. Is the new covenant the rules? So what we just did there wasn't directly tying back to the Jeremiah study, because it was a question that came up, but I wanted to address that. So I'm going to come back to Jeremiah study next time in 2 weeks because we've run out of time now. But I do want to say this. Sometime in the past, recent past, back in the day, we used to look at people as individual boxes. We used to compartmentalize people in boxes. Yeah. You can either do that based on gender, based upon their qualification, their age, their color, depending on what metric you want to use. So this was the old way of looking at people, and the new way of looking at people is very different. How do we look at people now? Not as these discrete, compartmentalized things or entities. We see humans more as in a group. Yep. So someone said equal. So I'm going to say that line now represents a human being or collectively, and each one of them are individual people. And we now look at human beings as a spectrum. Yep. We don't say black and white now. We say, there's many shades. The whole issue of gender is, the more you realize it, you realize it's really problematic. It's not that straightforward. Just say that there's two. You're as young as you feel. So ageism, which is a big problem in our movement, by the way, a huge problem, and I don't think it's been addressed seriously. But we tend to see things on a spectrum now, as opposed to looking as people as, which box do you fit in? So however we got to this place, what it's forced us to realize is that each of us are on an individual journey. So we can understand spectrum in very different ways, but I want to kind of do it this way. Some of us are taller than others. And when I say taller, I don't mean physically. I mean, in whatever kind of metric you want to look at, we're not all created the same. Or if we're created the same, our environment has molded us that we're very different in our capacities and our capabilities. So if that's the case, when God comes to judge you, that's this bit, the you, and God's going to say, are you fit for purpose or not? Can God apply the rules in exactly the same way for person number 1 or person number 6? God can't. The rules can't be done that way. So it has to be tailored to each person. So the problem with looking at individuals to see if we're good or bad, whether we've passed or failed, whether we're ready or not, is that it becomes a very subjective matter. So subjective that the individual can't even know for themselves. There are some metrics that we can have. So when the question was asked, are these institutions the new covenant? I'm not trying to suggest that at all. The new covenant is what it was, has always been. The way you interact with humans, the golden rule, how you interact with God. But the standard that a person is judged in their conduct has to be done in a way that most of us aren't really capable of doing. And so I don't think it's possible to say there's 100 of us and 5 of us are passed or 1 of us has passed and the others haven't. Because when you look at the 99, there's no way to know whether they have passed or not, whether they're failing or succeeding. Because in the expression that used to be in the olden days, you can't tell a bad wheat from a good tear. If you can sort of grasp that. It's hard to see the difference between a good tear and a bad wheat because they look very similar. So that's why I'm saying the us, can't be the metric upon which we define whether or not the church is now fit and done its duty, done its part to say the end can come. I think we're already there. If you believe we're at the Sunday law now, at least by the Sunday law, we achieve success, which is where prophecy, if you take all of Ellen White's writings, however difficult they are to process and understand, if you take them at the very basic level, that's what she expects. But when she spoke about it, she hammers on, goes on and on about the individuals you need to get ready. You're receiving the mark of the beast before it's even come, and it's always an individual statement. But I think we've misunderstood what that means. And if you understand it at a corporate level, if you understand it at institutional level, in the recent past, I think we've passed. Last question, then we close. I think last question.
Can one person think of this?
Depending on how we want to define institution, I want to say that if the institution is the Constitution, it's a document that's locked up in some room and it stands on its own 2 feet. It's independent and separate from the individual at that level. So the methodology is what it is. It's Miller's rules. We attribute to a human, but it's those rules. And they are the rules, whether you understand them or not, whether you apply them properly or not. So they're fixed. What we then need to do is look at the evidence to see if those rules, those objective rules, have been followed correctly. I'm suggesting that they have. Enough people have participated in the creation of this message that we have. Enough people have observed and analyzed the results or the conclusion of what has been taught to get to a place where we say we haven't made any mistakes. Everything's correct. So if that's so, it's not based upon some individual, because some individual might say, I think we made a mistake somewhere. Collectively, we know that we haven't.
Not built, like, they just don't build the institutions aren't there.
There's an interplay between the individual and the movement, if I can put it that way. But the institution can't be dependent upon the human being. Its application can be. A while back, we were in some study and someone said, speaking about rights, they said, your God-given rights. And I suggested in that study, I don't think that's an appropriate term to use, that we've got God-given rights. I think we've just got rights. And those rights are based upon our being, not based upon God. Because if you have God-given rights, that means the only rights that you can have are the ones that God approves of. And if you don't believe in God, or you have a weird God, then you have different rights. So human rights have to be independent of God, have to be independent of a person's views or their biases. That's what I think we call innate human rights. Now, when we put those innate human rights into practice, most people don't do a very good job. They get skewed, they get failed, failure happens. So people don't do a good job of putting the institutions into practice, but the institutions in and of themselves have to be independent of the individual's biases, don't they? Miller's rules don't change depending on who's doing the study. If they're not, if it comes out a flop, it's because the person didn't apply the rules properly. And it takes someone else to pinpoint and show what went wrong. And then the person says, yes, they were the mistake. They didn't implement the rules properly, but the rules aren't flexible or changing. And I don't think the institutions are. Equality, if you want to call it equality, equity, whatever phrase you want to use, doesn't change based upon the individual who's using them or applying them in whatever way they are doing so. But they can misapply them, misuse them, corrupt them even sometimes, or twist them to their own biases. Sure, because the institution there is to serve humanity. I mean, the Constitution, I know the Constitution was created by people, but once it's there to do a service for people. So humans, you and I, we need these institutions. We need the message, methodology, organizations. They're there to serve us. We're not there to serve them. I don't know if that answered your question. You're not sure either? Okay. We've run out of time. I want to just quickly summarize that the new covenant is about a change of heart. That change of heart, I don't think, if there's anything that you have learned about equality, you would have learned that it's not that straightforward as you might think. Because each person, the way they have the new covenant experience is different for them, and it looks different when people observe it. Because when I look at people, I say, you call that a new covenant? And they say, I'm doing the best I can. If you had walked in my shoes, you'd know I'm doing pretty good. So I'm sure you can all relate to that idea. So there are three entities. There's a timer, there's the nations, and the church. All of them have to be doing their things all at the same time, which we tend to call the time of the end, and there's a confluence of things that happen all at once. We know that the timer works properly. We can see, there's plenty of evidence that the nations are behaving properly and doing their own thing correctly. And the question is the church, because when we look around, most people say, this movement is not a safe place. I get mistreated. It's a terrible place to be. I'm suggesting that the movement is in good shape. It's actually, if I can use the term, it's arrived. The methodology, the message has brought us to the right place at the right time. And organizationally, I'm not saying we don't, there are still not refinements to make, but organizationally, we have now properly implemented the midnight crime message. And we've done that for several years now on most metrics. And what I would encourage each of us to do is look beyond the individuality of yourself and the leader that you have to interact with, or the teacher that you don't like, who doesn't teach in the way that you find agreeable, that you understand, that makes sense to you. There are alternatives. So I don't think God's waiting for any of us to get ready or not. The timer hasn't quite struck the hour. The nations aren't quite there yet, but we're pretty much all settled. If you want to, in the terms of ladies, if you want to get on the ark, if you want to have some fun in the future, get your life in order. The New Testament, New Covenant, which we'll continue to talk about, is now on offer to everybody. Take it or leave it. But things are happening with or without you, as the song goes. Let's close this prayer. Holy God, on my own behalf and behalf of others, I want to solicit you. And even though I know that both in the world, the clock of time, clock of prophecy, even the institutions of this movement, everything is in place, is all ready for the end to come. It will come in time, on time, according to your will. The only thing that each of us has to decide is whether or not we want to be part of that number. Often it's very difficult for us to know whether we're in the faith or not. But one thing I would ask that you would help each of us to come to terms with, something that you've told us over and over again, something that I forget so often, is to stop comparing myself with others. Surely when we enter into an experience that you have shown us in the history of Moses, in the book of Deuteronomy, in the book of Jeremiah, in the book of Hebrews, and in the writings and the ministry of the prophets at the end of the world, it's that unless we accept the truth for our own time, unless we fall in love with you and are broken, that we will miss heaven. May that not be our experience. May each of us stop looking at one another and turn our hearts and our minds to you. In Jesus' name, amen.